I'm happy to be back in Bonn, in whatever capacity. Don't take all these titles and career too seriously. It simply means I'm getting old. So let's focus on the subject matter. Here you see the screen, the title of this performance. This is actually research that Pranjal and I have been doing, and still we hope to be able to continue it at some point also in one form or the other, or offshoots of that. It used to be called Downstream of the Dam. I'll explain to that in a minute. But it is now called Performance, Consumption and Production, State Governance and the Uses and Meanings of Water in the Sardar Sarovar Project in Gujarat in India. And though this picture is not really representative for the whole theme, I left it because it is the light is so beautiful in this picture, and the farmer that we see here is part of the story, but it is not the full story. Okay. So where are we? You've already seen a map of India in the first presentation. We are now in a slightly further south. The red part of India called Gujarat. It's not red in India, of course, but it's red on the map. It's this part sticking out. And this is a state, a pretty dry state. You can see in the top right map, the darker red it is, the less rainfall there is. Gujarat has parts that are very rainfall scarce. Let's say the border on the northwest side is with Pakistan, which is where you enter into the desert, basically. So there's quite a bit of rain in the south of Gujarat, but the further northwest you move, the scarcer the rainfall becomes. So why is that important? Because this water scarce state decided a long time ago that it would like to have additional water, and it takes that water from a neighboring state called Madhya Pradesh. If you look at the map, you see in the bottom right map, you see the words called that say dam site, and that is almost exactly at the border of two states, where the river Narmada leaves Madhya Pradesh and has another 20-30 kilometers to go to the sea, and that's where they build a reservoir. And that water, so it's basically an interbasin transfer. That water from the dam site at the border of the state is then through a huge set of canals, about 700 kilometers long main canal, is distributed over part of Gujarat. So this project is, I'll say it's been a very controversial project, particularly the dam. I'll say that it's internationally known and influential, the resistance against the dam, but it is also, within Gujarat, it is heavily supported. And the phrase that is used in Gujarat is that this dam and the canal and the water that comes from it is the lifeline of Gujarat. And so this water is life sentence that we see in every policy document that we open. Here is also turned into a different phrase. It's the lifeline of Gujarat, the canal. That's how the water comes in. And indeed, it's a huge amount of extra water that comes into the state. So why research this project? Well, it has been it's a very well-known project. Extraordinarily strong for and against discourses associated with the dam and the project. A lot of social movements. It went up to the global level. It was one of the main triggers for the World Commission on. For the World Commission on Dams establishment in the late 1990s, which investigated the problems with large-scale dam building. So we have plenty of scholarship on the dam and the resistance against it. We have very little scholarship on once the dam was finally built. The Supreme Court allowed it to the maximum height, and so the water started flowing in the early 2000s into the state. We have virtually no scholarship on the impact, what is happening with that water. So a library full on the resistance, very little on the past 20 years of water use. So the other reason is that it is a huge project. So logic says that it will have an impact at state level. It's not just some local project, but it provides water to the larger part of the state. And therefore, it makes it a very good, the academic logic then follows that it makes it a very good case, exactly because it's so large and impactful for an interdisciplinary cultural, political, media, water and development. That's the kind of academic project that is in the background here. Quickly, now here, just a few pictures to give you some imagery, the same map. This is the dam, this is the reservoir in the middle. And then you see two photos of the resistance, ecological damage through submergence, particularly forest submergence, and as a result of that, displacement of people who live in forests, tribal people, but also other people. So that were the two main items in the dam resistance movements. And many people would say, unfortunately, the resistance, it delayed the dam building, but it didn't stop the dam building. So that is the very short summary of that. Here's some illustration of the libraries full of documentation. I don't know how many PhD theses have been written on the Sardar Sarovar Project, and they're all about the dam. And here you see a great book by Amitabh Viskar, In the Belly of the River, but we also have the World Bank report here and a collection of documents by my colleague Philippe Goulet at SOAS. So endless. So if you want to read about that, please do. There is a huge amount of literature, but our focus is different. Downstream of the dam, like I said, the original title of this research. So what is happening downstream? What is this water doing in the state? So very simple empirical question. What is the newly released water used for? And what are the meanings attached to the water, its different uses, and similarly to the water infrastructure, because water never comes without infrastructure. So you will always have to talk about both the water and the water infrastructure. Now, and these meanings is important because it is not just about quantities of water going for certain uses, but it is the kind of social, political, economic, cultural meaning of that water use that is of interest to us. But the two broader questions are, how is the Sardar Sarovar Project as the lifeline of Gujarat? Here you have that sentence. Part of a development policy trajectory in which there is neoliberalism, modernization, and Gujarati Hindu nationalism, Hindutva combined. So we are trying to understand what kind of a development process is this part of, and is it supporting and perhaps redirecting or helping to redirect? And then an even more abstract question on the social theory level, how to understand the relationship between water infrastructure and political rule. So how do we understand that connection? How do we think about water and water infrastructure in a political way in terms of governance and rule? Okay, here we are. So 3 layers of discussion, of which I will cover 2 in the presentation, and then the third one you can ask questions about if you're interested, but I won't go into that here. Simply, descriptively, what are the uses and meanings of Narmada or Sardar Sarovar Project water in Gujarat? What's happening? And then the kind of analytical question, what kind of development in Gujarat is the project part of, and what kind of state governance is the project a vehicle for? So these are the more analytical questions that interest us. And then the methodological questions are about interdisciplinarity, etc., and political economy issues. Happy to talk about that, but I won't say much about it in this presentation. So what's happening with the water? Now, the kind of typology that we use, an irrigation engineer or a hydrologist would then go for wetlands, hydropower, irrigation, domestic water, the different water uses in that technical sense. So what we've done in the paper, the working paper that it's almost ready for publication at ZEF, a few edits, and then it will go for review. So it should be available before long on the website. We have said, well, if you're interested in the meaning of water, then you have to classify not just technically, but you have to look at what kind of meanings are attached to water and water infrastructure. And we've distinguished that in performative, consumptive, and productive. Now, at the end of the story, you will see that all 3 are always there, but some are more important than others for certain uses. So that's a complicated story to tell, but hopefully at the end that will be slightly clearer. So we're beginning with a plan in the 1980s, which you can see on this blue map, the lined area, the marked area. That's the proposal for the irrigation system that was going to be linked to this canal, which takes the water from the neighboring state. Now, 1980s plan development, government top-down, irrigation system, agriculture being the main function. And then in one paragraph in that project document, it says 7% is for drinking water. No further specification what that was going to be, but the other few hundred pages are about what this irrigation system is going to look like. So water, a dam, and a canal system for agricultural development. That's where the project started. A little bit of hydropower at the dam. Very traditional, conventional, large-scale irrigation system, not just in India, but globally from that period. Now, but then all the delay in the building, and then it gets finished late 1990s, early 2000s, water can be released, and society has changed. We are in liberalization. Priorities have changed in society. So the first thing we looked at, what is actually happening with the water and how important is agricultural still? Now, what we see is that one of the first things that happened is that they used part of the water for something completely different, which is no project document, original project then whatsoever. They use it, what we are calling here urban beautification. They use some of the water from the canal to construct this seemingly great river, the Sabarmati River. This is the river that flows through the economic capital of Gujarat. It's very close to that main canal. And they use some of the water to convert 24 kilometers, 22 of that river into a longitudinal lake, basically. The discourse, the narrative here is we're rejuvenating the river, we're restoring the river, but what is actually happening is 22 kilometers of lake with canal water from Madhya Pradesh, with 11 kilometers developed as promenades, boating. Here we see the chief minister of the state at that time kind of opening it. You can do all the kind of these exercises. There are biodiversity parks, gardens. So for some of them, you have to pay entrance. And the idea is that there will be a lot of real estate development on the banks of the river. Now, this came at the cost of a lot of displacement of people poor people who tended to use the riverbed for all kinds of activities. So that's quite an interesting development. This has become the model for riverfront development in India, and it's now being rolled out on a large scale. At least that's the plan in other cities. So here you see.
Is it completely artificial or is it just enlarged?
It's the riverbed is as it was, though they have made these concrete walls only 11 kilometers. So it's actually the riverbed has been narrowed in this place.
Okay.
So in the non-rainy season, in the dry season, it's completely artificial because in the original regime of the river, there's very little or no water. It's not a perennial river.
Right.
It is a seasonal river which only really carries water in monsoon. Even that had already been undermined by damming upstream and extraction upstream. But it's a perennial river. It was the second or third most polluted river in India because of industrial development. Ludhiana, this was also an industrial city. So it was smelling and stinking because all the wastewater also went into the dry riverbed. Now you can imagine what happens in summer, in the dry period. So it's completely artificial, except in the monsoon, then there is considerable water in the river as well. So then you don't have to take it from the canal necessarily. So it's basically you let it, I'll show that on the map. So here is your left picture, you have the city of Ahmedabad, city boundary. The canal moves just north upstream of the city, and you divert a little bit. You see that in the right picture. You see the canal, the straight line, and then some water is diverted into this riverbed. And then at 22 kilometers on the other side of the city, you build a weir so that there's a little bit of flow so that it doesn't start to smell too much. So that's basically what it is. But if you only take the picture in the city, it looks as if you're on the River Rhine in Bonn, so to speak, as if you would have a flowing river for that. So this is urban beautification. This is performative use. Because this is for middle-class consumption, people stroll here, people recreate here. You have to go there by car. You have to pay entrance to some of the things. So this is kind of modernity for the middle class. The models are Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong. Those are kind of the references that people have in designing this. Okay, I won't spend. I've talked a little bit about it in January, so I won't spend long about it. Here you see a few more pictures of pollution, but here you see. So you just see it's a totally planned recreational area, basically, with real estate development also for the economic viability, and that's the plan. And it's also a political stage. This is the head of state of China, and when you have an important person coming, whether it's from Pakistan or China or anywhere, France, I think, or Canadian, the Canadian Prime Minister was also so good that you exhibit that to that visitor and say, look here, India is great. It's not just America is great again, but it's also India is great. And so it is a symbolic, performative thing. It doesn't consume a lot of water, but the water is very important it's crucial that it looks like a real river, but it isn't. It's a lake, and a really strange lake. Okay, then we come to the second type of use. There are other forms of performative use of water, but this is kind of the most obvious and most evocative one. Now, one of the things they did when the water started flowing wasn't, of course, they started with constructing the irrigation system, but what happened much faster was that suddenly there was a plan, which had been in the making for some time, but almost immediately when there was water in the canal, they decided to execute a statewide, centralized, government-managed drinking water grid, covering a much larger part of the state as the irrigation system. So here, I'll show you the map. This is the leaflet for that. This is the map. Oh yeah, this is this nice animated map. So what you see is the moving part is that the drinking water pipelines that were constructed, pumping water from this irrigation canal. So you can see this, the narrow black line on the right is the canal and all the other, and then at certain points you extract water from that irrigation canal and you make it into, I mean, it doesn't end in the sea. This is a mismatch of the software. So the pipelines are on the land, not in the sea. But there are other versions of this map. Also, it's actually not given the whole network one, but I like it so much because it's animated. So you see that it extends way beyond the command area of the irrigation system. And it is counterintuitive because we are living in the neoliberal age. The discussion on drinking water is on privatization, bringing in the private sector. And here we see a government that otherwise is very market oriented in its economic policy, big business, agro-industrial farming. It suddenly decides we will do a pipeline grid, the largest centralized drinking water grid they claim in the world. We'll do it. We'll build it. It's actually been built. We've checked, water is delivered, of course, all kinds of issues in distribution, etc., particularly towards the end of the pipelines, but it functions with all the limitations that you would normally expect. But it's actually there. And they did it in no time, much faster than the irrigation system. It's also not as expensive as the irrigation system, but it is very fast. So apparently this was a high political priority. Higher, apparently, than completing the irrigation system, which was the original design feature, the design idea. Mm-hmm. So, interesting question about governance. Why is that? We'll come to
5 minutes.
Yeah, we're almost there. Oh, this is not productive use, the productive use here. So productive, we try to see, many people claim that a lot of the water is used by industry. We went to check that. We couldn't, and we haven't actually been able to find large amounts of consumptive use for productive use of water in industry. We suspect that it's mostly the drinking water guarantee is important to facilitate industrial investment so that your workers actually have water in the home. Otherwise, you build your factory somewhere else. We suspect that it is that role of water for industrial development more than the actual consumption of water. But we investigated it because in civil society, there were some places that massive amounts of water are diverted to industry and not going to the people. We haven't found any evidence for that. So here we are. So then we come to the agricultural use. Now, this is, of course, I'm an irrigation scholar, so I'm extra interested in this. And of course, this is still about 90% of the water goes to agriculture by design or by default. And what we've done, I'll just tell you what we've done without going into the detail. You can then ask questions if you're interested. Our assumption was there must be a noticeable impact because it's a huge amount of water that is being pushed into existing agricultural systems in different regions. And it's not a mean amount, it's not the whole state, as you can see, it's only the green area, but it's still a very significant part of the state, particularly of the agricultural heartland of the state. So there must be something impact. So what is that impact? In a relational sense, what does it do to agrarian relations? What does it do to rural dynamics and agrarian dynamics? Now, we are not fully capable of answering that question in full detail because this is very large. So you would need a massive survey to do kind of a covering thing. So we've done it in a qualitative way, and we've tried to build a typology on the different kinds of relational impacts in different regions as a hypothesis, basically, for further research. So we distinguish 4 regions going from, let's say, the bottom right, where you see the reservoir, where you see the dam site, Sardar Sarovar dam site, and then this red line is the canal which goes into Gujarat, into Rajasthan, the neighboring state a bit. And then we have 4 regions in Gujarat, types of regions that we think will exhibit different agricultural impacts, agrarian dynamics as a result of this inflow of this massive amount of water. Very briefly, no interest due to rural-urban change, or no is too strong. Tentative, limited interest in the most upstream region closest to the dam, where they have the most secure water supply. There, people are only so much interest. It has to do with soil quality, but also has to do with other water sources being available. It also has to do with industry and industrial employment being available very close by. So quite surprising, counterintuitive that you say the closer to the source you are, the more easy to use the water. Exactly the opposite is the case. It's not that they don't use the water, but it's not that kind of boom thing or extra thing that you would expect. Then we slightly further down is the old heartland of the dairy heartland. Some of you are familiar with India, have heard about the milk revolution, the Operation Flood in the 1970s and 80s, the introduction of fodder production from dairy farming, and now the cooperative dairy project. Amul Dairy is a multinational and a huge company. That is where the milk is produced, particularly in this dairy heartland, Vadodara, Kedah, already very intensive farming. And what the water does is basically intensify that further. So you can now take your fodder production fully across the dry season because your groundwater is recharged, etc. So it doesn't make major changes, but it stabilizes and intensifies an already existing system. That's our hypothesis there. Then thirdly, we come to another well-known region from the literature, the tube well revolution literature, deep groundwater up to 700 feet, 200 meters, capitalist agriculture, market-oriented, Patel community dominant, very well-known in the Indian case. And there, that had declined because groundwater became too expensive and too deep. And what basically the water seems to be doing is recharge groundwater and allow a new round of capitalist development And in the fourth region, which is actually two regions, and one is a hypothesis because the water wasn't there when we did the field work, Saurashtra and Kutch, dry areas, virtually no irrigation, very low rainfall. Here the water comes in as potential an enormous boom. Landing holdings are large because of very extensive cultivation that are there. So you certainly get a lot of water in a very large land holding, and potentially you get all kinds of very dynamic development there. So that's how we try to do that. I'll just quickly show you a few pictures. This is the no interest region, or limited interest, tentative interest region would be more accurate. And that's where the industry is as an employer. They all want to move out of agriculture. This is the dairy heartland, and you see intensification here of fodder and of horticultural crops that are now more easily done the whole year. This is the third area, agri-industrial farming, the heartland of deep tube wells. This is a cucumber producer and also a little bit of bell pepper. Migrant farmers from California, returned migrants, NRIs, as they're called, non-resident Indians, that come back, invested, and they literally said, we're modeling our farm on the Californian example. So whether this actually will fly it's not an easy question, but some of it, one or two of them fly. So this is the kind of ideal capitalist agriculture that also the government is imagining as a model for agriculture. And in some places it's happening. And then the fourth one is, here's something shifting. The new irrigation boom. The most interesting picture is, what you see here is a farmer who would receive water for the first time and left. He said he wasn't sure what the irrigation would do. So what he did was one field without irrigation and the other field with irrigation. And this is what's the castor oil cost. So you can see he was easily convinced. So he did the same with cumin and etc. So you see, this is kind of illustrates the potential large drip irrigation installation by entrepreneurs, etc. So potential boom there. So that's the different types of scenarios that we have. Now, very quickly to conclude, how do we interpret this? What does this mean? Well, there are three kinds of developments that are happening. There's economic change, there's political and institutional change, and there's cultural change that is associated with this project. I'll just read the bottom lines. So the water supports, with all kinds of hurdles and problems, capitalist expanded reproduction pursued with great vigor. This is also official government policy, a kind of a market-oriented agricultural development, industry very clearly. So that's the economic story, the neoliberal story, if you want. In agriculture, not very successful, only very partially. In industry, much more successful. The political institutional change has to do with state building. This system literally links the whole state, which has a history of having different regions. So one story might be centralized control. The state extends its arm over the whole state. The other story might be that with increasing claims on water, you would actually get more regional competition. We don't know yet because we are still only 20 years into the project, and only 10 years in some degree of completion. So we'll have to see how that. But so there's a clear political governance issue in that terms and others as well. And then cultural change in the urban area, pushing of middle class consumers of modernity, symbolizes modernity. But also there's the relationship still has to be understood better, a yet to be fully understood combination of globalization, modernization, and then this Gujarati nativism or Hindutva. So that we still have to unpack that somewhat. That I'm almost there. This was I've already said. The last point that I want to make is that why is this interesting from a governance perspective? I mean, what do we learn in terms of state governance? Now, one of the things we learn is that the government is quite, in our present understanding, self-consciously using very differently oriented governance strategies for different uses of water. So it's very neoliberal, market-oriented in some domains, particularly industry, and part of agriculture, but it's very populist, if you want, or welfarist oriented when it comes to drinking water. And it is very modernist of a particular kind when it comes to beautification. So this government is not, you can't say it is all neoliberal market oriented, and it's not the old populism of planned development, and it's not just modernity. It's some interesting combination of that is happening in this state system. So we are still looking for a word. So if you have a nice term for us, then there's a lot of discussion in India at the moment. How do we characterize the present form of political rule and governance with a BJP government in power since a few weeks or since recently for a third term? What kind of a regime is this? What's happening here? What is changing? Is something changing? So the best phrase I have here at the moment, it's one of the many phrases you could come up with: neoliberal developmental state with a centralizing authoritarian inflection. Because because it's both market oriented, it is welfarist, and it has a particular cultural and ideological project as well. So what kind of a state is, and very centralizing in some respects. So what kind of a state is this? That's the question I will leave you to. And if you are, here is that I'll skip. And if you see there's no end to the different uses of irrigation water, you can also simply swim. I'll stop there, but I'll go back to this slide for the question.